All right, welcome. So for this explainer, we're not here to analyze or predict anything. We are simply observing. We're going to walk through a visual case study for a proprietary method known as market DNA. Basically, we're documenting each phase exactly as it was recorded. Let's dive in.
So what you're looking at here, this is the heart of the market DNA method. It's a proprietary geometric system. And for this case study, we're seeing it applied to a major market index. Our job here is just to be observers, following the documentation phase by phase.
So it all kind of boils down to this one question. Can market cycles actually be viewed through a purely geometric lens? That's really what this documentation is exploring. We're not going to get into the why it might work. We're just documenting what happened when this model was applied.
Now, the asset at the center of this particular case study is a big one. It's the US100, which, as you probably know, is the NASDAQ 100 index.
Okay, so this is where our observation really kicks off. Phase 1, which they call the setup. And the documentation for this begins on February 1st, 2026. This is where all the initial parameters get laid out.
This chart right here, this is our visual starting point for phase 1. Right off the bat, the model flags two key entry levels. The main one, the primary entry, is labeled M, and then there's a secondary level noted as P of C.
All right, let's get into the specific numbers that define this whole setup. You've got the primary entry M sitting at 25,316.4. The secondary entry P of C, that's a bit lower, at 24,981.3. The model also defines something called the trapezoid time duration, which is set for 19 days, and a risk coefficient, which is set to 3. These all seem to be key proprietary inputs for this system.
Now, the documentation continues by laying out a risk preview. And it does this using a hypothetical $100,000 in capital, just as a baseline. It establishes an expected maximum drawdown of 5%. It also specifies values for what it calls the third triangle domain and the risk domain. And finally, a contract size is set at 10 units. These are all the variables the model is going to work with.
So after the model crunches all those initial parameters, the entries, the risk factors, the contract size, it spits out one really precise number. The size for each trade is calculated to be 0.08.
And just to be perfectly clear about how that number is determined, the source documentation provides this exact statement. So I'm just going to read it to you verbatim. Both trade sizes are calculated using the hypothetical capital, the investor's maximum allowed drawdown, the third triangle domain percentage, the risk coefficient, and the contract size.
Okay, with the whole setup in place, the model then gives us three potential price targets. Target 1 is at 25,425, which the model refers to as the mirror. Target 2 is at 25,800, a key level they call apex N, and the final target, T3, is up at 26,242, and that's described as the trapezoid top. So based on those targets, the initial plan lays out two different possible scenarios. Scenario 1 over on the left assumes a single entry, just at that M level. That projects a potential annual return of a little over 9%. But scenario 2, on the right, that one factors in both entry levels, M and P of C. And as you can see, this scenario projects a much higher potential annual return of 26.7%.
Okay, now let's jump forward in the documentation. It's only one day later. We're on February 2nd, and what gets recorded next is pretty interesting. It's not phase 2. The model documents a phase 3 event, and that's defined as an N-level event.
And this side-by-side comparison really tells the story of what happened. On the left, that's the initial setup from phase 1. And on the right, you can see the market action that followed. The price just shot straight up, and it hit that exact level that was designated as apex N.
So just to be crystal clear, the price hit 25,800. This was precisely the level that was defined back in the plan as target 2 or apex N. And according to the rules of this model, that move officially completes phase 3.
All right, this brings us to the last part of this case study, observing the path forward from this point on, based on the current state of the analysis.
So phase 3 is in the books. The big question now is, what's next? Where do we go from here? What does the model's documentation suggest might happen?
Well, the notes in the documentation say that the path here was straight from phase 1 to phase 3. It mentions that this is a known, though less common sequence within the model. Interestingly, the notes do suggest that phase 2 could still be the next event on the horizon. But for now, the case study just ends here, with the observation continuing.
And before we wrap this up, we absolutely have to go through some mandatory disclaimers. This is really important information, so please pay close attention.
Okay,
First, and most important, this is not financial advice. Second, the model strictly prohibits using leverage above 10. Third, do not invest essential personal funds you can't afford to lose. Remember, this analysis is being shared only as part of public model documentation. And finally, any risk management has to follow the user's own specific instructions.
And there you have it. That wraps up our step-by-step documentation of this market DNA case study. Again, we've simply observed the application of the model exactly as it was recorded. If you're looking for more information from the source of this documentation, you can visit the website you see on your screen. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.